It is surprisingly difficult to get arpeggios to sound good in a solo, and often the whole thing becomes boring and predictable with these uninspired melodies. So it's really useful and also really important to work on becoming better at writing jazz licks that not only sound great but also sound like you. In this video I took a really basic C major 7 1-octave arpeggio, and then I wrote 25 different jazz licks. So if you're working on not only becoming better at writing jazz licks, but also really writing jazz licks that sound like you, then check out this video. My name is Larsen, learn jazz, make music. First I want to show you a few examples with just the most basic form of the arpeggio, so just the 1-octave ascending arpeggio. Then I'm going to add some variations to that, but I'm still keeping it really simple, and at the end of the video I'm also going to talk about some of the things that I'm not using, just so you have an idea about just how many options, how many great solid licks you can make just using an arpeggio and then putting it together with some of the other things you anyway know. Maybe it's just important to point out that I did not make this video just to throw it at my students whenever they complain that they can't make some decent lines with arpeggios. As you can see, it doesn't have to be really complicated to sound great. The construction of these licks is really pretty simple because I'm just playing the arpeggio and then I'm combining that with some notes out of the scale, a chromatic enclosure, maybe a diatonic triad. It's all really basic stuff, but still solid material and vocabulary that you can easily use in a solo. I think what you want to take away from this video is not as much the licks that I'm playing, as it is just the way that you can start working on making your own solid, strong licks that really sound great but also sound like you. And also a way of working on internalizing new things that you're practicing. When you're working on this, then keep in mind that you're making melodies. Don't just throw things together because you know it works or because you can play it. Try to make music, not just move your fingers. Now let's try to explore what you can do with a descending arpeggio. In these examples I'm using some chromatic enclosures that are a little bit more advanced or difficult to use because they're just mostly notes that are not found in the scale, so you need to be a little bit more careful when you put them into a line, but when they work, then that just feels so much better and they're definitely worth exploring. Another thing that you also want to notice here is that I'm using other triads than just the diatonic major and minor triads. So for instance, I'm using an E sus 4 triad on the C major 7 because that's also really both a great sound and a great melody to have in your vocabulary. Playing the arpeggio as an 8th note triplet is a great way to add a little bit more energy to the line. So it moves a little bit faster, it's really getting to that target note, which is of course the highest note in the arpeggio. And you're gonna hear this all over the place with people like Charlie Parker or Wes Montgomery. So there's no reason not to check this out. Actually, I think I did make this video just to tell my students that you can always come up with some solid lines with an arpeggio. Stop whining. In one of the licks you can see that I'm using another triad that's also diatonic to the scale, of course, and that's the triad that's found on the 5th of the C major 7 chord, so that's a G major triad. You also have one example where it's almost as if I'm playing E blues on top of the C major 7 chord, but that kind of works because E minor pentatonic is anyway a part of the scale. You can find an E minor pentatonic scale in a C major scale, and then adding that blues note still kind of works as long as you use it as a leading note. Until now, all the examples were starting with the arpeggio, but there's really no reason why you have to do it like that. So let's just try and put the arpeggio at the end of the line instead. As you can see, I rely really a lot on adding chromaticism to the lines, and that's really just because I think that makes it sound a little bit more like jazz, and it's also just a nice way to create some tension and release and some movement within the melodies. That's definitely a part of playing, especially bop-inspired lines, and also something that you definitely want to use. Keep in mind that even though I'm demonstrating this on a C major 7 arpeggio, then you can also use it on other chords where a C major 7 arpeggio works. So this sounds great if you're using it on an A minor 7 chord or a D7 chord, for instance. With the 25 examples that I've covered in this video, then I'm still keeping it pretty simple in terms of how I'm playing the arpeggio, because I'm really just playing an ascending or a descending version of that arpeggio. So there are a lot of things you can still do if you want to explore what's possible, if you want to come up with your own melodies. So some of the things you could do would be to add notes between the arpeggio notes. You can play sequences or patterns in the arpeggio, and you can also start working with inversions and octave displacements. So there are a lot of things that you can be creative with, that you can create great lines with. In fact, if you want to see a video of me doing some of that, then let me know in the comments. Now you can see how much you can do with a single 1-octave arpeggio. So you can probably also see how it's just really useful to know a lot of different arpeggios, because each arpeggio is a different melody and a different sound on top of a chord. And that means that if you're soloing, you just have more choice in terms of what kind of melody and what kind of sound you want to have in your solo. So if you want to dig a bit deeper into what is available, then check out this video where I'm going over 25 different arpeggios that all sound great on a D minor 7 chord.